fellow students, after having gone through the journey of studying the architectural contribution of the 4 great masters, let us come to an important topic, styles and movements. There are many styles and movements that came up in the 20th century that are there in the 21st century, and sometimes students and teachers, everybody, you, me, everybody get confused. What are these styles and movements? Which movement can we characterize this building in or categorize this building in? And how do we define a particular style and movement? So what I have attempted to do through this next few lectures is to try to give you an understanding of these styles and movements in the 20th and the 21st century. Beginning with one of the earliest that came, it was called as Art Deco. Now we have already seen movements or styles up to Art Nouveau. We have talked about neoclassicism, we have talked about the various phases of neoclassicism, we have talked about the development of architecture in the Industrial Revolution, then we have talked about the arts and crafts movement and Art Nouveau and the various names of Art Nouveau by which it became popular in Europe. We have also talked about the Chicago school, which in a sense was also a movement. Now we come to Art Deco that followed Art Nouveau in Europe. It was an eclectic style which was made up of traditional craft motifs along with machine age imagery and machine age or industrial materials. There was rich colors, bold geometric shapes and lavish ornamentation. It emerged between the periods of World War I and World War II, that is from somewhere around 1920 to somewhere around 1938 or 39, that this movement was there, and when rapid industrialization was transforming culture, and it was a period of lot of optimism that there will be much growth because of industrialization. There was a lot of flamboyance also getting reflected in architecture and arts, and this Art Deco was a movement of that period. This picture that you see is a part picture of the pinnacle of the Chrysler building, one of the tallest buildings of the time and continues to remain one of the tallest buildings of our modern times. Now it was an influential visual arts design style which first appeared in France after World War I, began flourishing internationally in 1920s to 40s before its popularity decreased right after World War II. I am sorry, not 30, 39, but somewhere around 1940, mid 1940s, it had started, the popularity had started diminishing, going down. And of course, because modernism had also already come around the First World War, it was also picking up pace, and by the end of the Second World War, modernism more or less replaced Art Deco, and modernism also in its various subsets which we will look at later. So there was an international exhibition of modern decorative and industrial arts held in Paris in 1925, in which a wide range of modern arts and architecture were displayed, and the style that dominated in this exhibition came to be called as Art Deco, and it inspired the design of jewelry, clothing, different types of clothing, handicraft and architecture. It was used in the design of cars with its very flowing lines and that kind of flamboyant imagery, and it was called as car deco. It was used in various products of daily life, and it came to be known as product deco, and thus Art Deco began to be used for designing our daily use appliances, whether it was a refrigerator, whether it was a transistor radio, whether it was a table clock, it was an iron, it was your teapot and cups, and or whether it was your cooking range or your gas stove. All of that was impacted by the design ideology Art Deco. If you compare it with that of Bauhaus and the daily use appliances that came out of Bauhaus parallelly approximately to this period, we find that in Bauhaus it was very, very different. So if we just make a comparison between Art Deco and Bauhaus, the integration of art and machine in both of them, but both with different philosophies. Last time, a couple of lectures back, I told you the difference between Art Nouveau's approach and Bauhaus' approach. Art Nouveau rejected machine, went back to handicrafts. Bauhaus accepted the machine and used it to make better design, integrating machine with architecture. And Art Deco appliances, and in the case of Art Deco and Bauhaus, the fundamental principle was the same. The both were willing to integrate art with the machine. They were not negating the machine. But Art Deco appliances were bold, decorative elements, luxurious materials, intricate patterns. They were glamorous and sophisticated. This was one way of integrating art with machine. The second was the Bauhaus appliances, which were minimalist, which were functional, they had clean lines, and often using the more industrial materials and simple form. Whereas Art Deco produced products which are glamorous and sophisticated, Bauhaus produced simply very simple forms, industrial looking appliances. Art Deco was supposed to dazzle and impress because it was reflective of a period where there was a lot of optimism and thus a lot of flamboyance of a very bright, hopeful future. Bauhaus, on the other hand, was much more toned down, much more reticent, and it talked of products that were practical, accessible, blending art seamlessly into everyday life. So you draw the comparison, say for example the cutlery of Art Deco with the cutlery of Bauhaus, the radio designed by Art Deco to a radio design under Bauhaus. Art Deco was one of the easiest styles to identify. Sharp edged looks, stylized geometric decorative details, very distinctive. Even today, if you are aware of a few Art Deco buildings, you can easily by your observation identify other Art Deco buildings which you see whether on paper or in real life. The development was an intentional break from past precedents and embodied the idea of the machine or the modern age. If you compare Art Deco with Victorian design, if we try to make that comparison, then Victorian in terms of comparison to Art Deco was expensive and difficult to maintain. This is Victorian, this is Victorian. Art Deco on the other hand is clean, uncluttered and requires little maintenance. This and this is Art Deco. If you compare Art Deco with Art Nouveau, just one movement before Art Deco was Art Nouveau, then Art Nouveau had very floral and elaborate decorative lines, detailed decoration, detailed lines. Art Deco is bold, it's stark and has simple and crisp lines. Decorative it is, but it is differently decorated. There is a machine age imagery about Art Deco. There is a flower-like or biological-like imagery about the decoration of Art Nouveau. Thus you compare the staircase of Art Nouveau with Art Deco, the Art Nouveau chair with the Art Deco chair, and the Art Nouveau building with the Art Deco building, and your visually you will be able to see the difference between the two. Art Deco, first public attention was drawn to it in 1922, I am talking about the United States, where there was a competition to design the tower for the Chicago Tribune headquarters, and Louis Sullivan entered his competition with the design of the building in the Art Deco design, Art Deco style. Gropius also gave an entry in early modernist design. This is Gropius' design. But the design that was finally accepted and built was in Neo-Gothic, and it was by J.M. Hobbles and R. Raymond Hood. They designed it. But Louis Sullivan's design, though not accepted, became widely publicized as an exciting new architectural style. And thus Art Deco over time became a common building type used in theatres, commercial buildings, offices, government buildings, apartments and even industrial buildings. So we have the Niagara Mohawk building, we have this Folies Bergère building, but I am focusing more in industrial building, the Hoover building in London or the Hoffman Candy Company in Los Angeles. Art Deco was used in all these buildings that you see on this slide. So if you look at the characteristics of Art Deco, it had smooth wall surfaces, you always find that, sharp edged linear appearance, very sharp, no curves used here, very stylized decorative elements using geometric forms as you see here, or even as you see here in the door of the elevator. The low relief decorative panels, this is an example also of low relief decorative panels, or even to some extent this one, where the relief was very less. That means the kind of depth created for putting up these decorative panels, they were not very deeply embedded, they were low relief decorative panels, and the building itself, if you look, was stepped back from the main front facade. The building was stepped back. The windows had these decorative spandrels that you see here, and these decorative panels in the spandrels is using geometric forms, and then there are details in doors and windows that was provided. But if you had at this time the imagery of Art Nouveau in your mind, you would remember how the details of the doors and windows used to have tendrils, used to have whiplash line or some kind of zoomorphic forms that were embedded in the grille work of the doors and windows, so very different. Thus there was geometric ornamentation in Art Deco. We can now say that there was what you would call religious ornamentation in a period of Baroque when the buildings were highly decorated. In the Art Nouveau, an anti-reaction took place against that, and the buildings became non-ornamented. But by the time you reach the end of the 19th century and you reach the period of Art Nouveau, where ornamentation comes back, this is based on biological themes. So this is biological, or I would say biomorphic ornamentation. But when you move to Art Deco, it becomes geometric ornamentation. Ornamentation is there, but it is changing, the context is changing, the fundamental thing behind it is changing. In Baroque, religion was the backdrop. In Art Nouveau, biomorphic or biology or zoology was the backdrop. In Art Deco, it is geometry, and there are chevrons and zigzags and other geometric motifs which was common forms of ornamentation in Art Deco. Now since Art Deco style, there was the use of new construction technology particularly suitable for design for 20th century skyscrapers. So they were using a steel frame for these very tall buildings that began to be built in the Art Deco style. One of the major attributes was Art Deco embraced technology, did not reject it. Distinguishes Art Deco from organic motifs favored by Art Nouveau, and also because the parallel arts and crafts movement, which was parallel to Art Nouveau, the architects like John Ruskin and William Morris had rejected the use of machines. So that way Art Deco was forward looking, machines are here to stay, we have to now provide the kind of art and craft that the machine can give shape to, that we can produce that kind of buildings and articles in the industrial period. Thus historian Bevis Hillier said or defined Art Deco as a modern style that ran to symmetry rather than asymmetry, to rectilinear rather than curvilinear, responded to demands of the machine and of new material, and to the requirements of mass production. Now this statement actually is very, very important. Please try to understand. Why is this statement important? That though modernism had not yet taken deep roots in Europe or even in America, but that shift from the Art Nouveau thinking was brought about by Art Deco. That machine, we will work along with the machine and not against the machine. We will produce, we will be meeting the requirements of mass production. We will be working with new material, we will be working with rectilinear forms. These all form the basis of what was to come modernism. It was the fuel that led towards, that was pushing modernism in the days to come. And during its heyday, at its very peak, Art Deco represented luxury, glamour and faith in social and technological progress, and it was this faith that led Art Deco to represent luxury and glamour and flamboyance in the work. Thus we have the Chrysler building, which is an Art Deco skyscraper on the east side of Manhattan, headquarters of the Chrysler Corporation from 1930 to the mid 1950s, and it has many Art Deco features, whether it is the way the facade is, like I told you, it's a if you go back to the characteristics of Art Deco, it has smooth wall surfaces and sharp edged corners, sharp edged appearance in the Chrysler building. This ornamentation is there, this gargoyle has been provided at the top, and then the interiors are very luxurious with rich materials have been used. This is the inside of the Chrysler building. Find geometric forms of ornamentation on the various features. And then Chrysler building, which was 19 meters tall along with the spire, was surpassed by the Empire State Building in 1931, which was 443 meters tall, including the spire. The Empire State Building, designed by William F. Lamb in 1931, became an American cultural icon of the Art Deco. This is the exterior of the Empire State Building, and again you find Art Deco geometric style ornamentation all over. You find smooth, straight facade, sharp corners, rectilinear, the building is rectilinear, and then the interiors, rich, luxurious interiors like the Chrysler building are there in the Empire State Building also. Thus the Empire State Building, with its tallest, it was 443 meters. Then in New York came the World Trade Center North Tower, that along with its spire was 527 meters. Unfortunately, these buildings were destroyed. Their place has been taken by the One World Trade Center, which with its spire is now 541 meters. This is post 9/11, this is the greatest height available, and it was achieved in 2012. Now Art Deco also came to Mumbai. It will be very interesting for you to know that the second largest number of Art Deco buildings in the world are in Mumbai after Miami. Mumbai is an Art Deco city, and this is a notable architectural style of Mumbai. Mumbai being a port city next to the sea, lot of sailors, lot of people from other nations were coming there who were bringing in the Art Deco style into Mumbai. They were building buildings in the Art Deco style, primarily for office buildings, residences, movie theatres during a period when India was a part of the British Empire. Most buildings of this period spread throughout various neighbourhoods of Mumbai like Churchgate and Colaba, etc. And the Indian Institute of Architects also played a very important role in propagating the Art Deco movement, and they did that in one way was, in 1937 they organized an ideal home exhibition, just as an exhibition was held in Paris in 1922 that actually led to the term Art Deco and its development and its growth. This was an exhibition held in Bombay, spanned for 12 days, attracted 100,000 visitors, and it is mentioned in the Journal of Indian Institute of Architects. It was a great success, and thus Art Deco took deep roots in Mumbai. Ideal home exhibition focused on various elements of home. There was furniture, interior decoration, radios, refrigerators, very similar to the products that was there in the exhibition held in Paris, and Indian architects were fascinated by the modernity that Art Deco was offering. There were rounded corners, there were streamlined designs, and these were influenced at that time. You see that cars, airplanes, all of this were coming newly into the industrial society, and everybody was very fascinated by them, by the shape of the automobile or the shape of the aircraft, and these shapes were then imitated in buildings. Whether it was the curves or the streamlines borrowed from airplanes, ships, trains, automobiles in the early 20th century, all this could be seen in these buildings, all the way up to the portholes of the ships. You could see these make the buildings appear to be aerodynamic, fast, futuristic and sleek, just like these other objects like cars and airplanes from which this imagery had been borrowed. The intention was to make the Art Deco buildings look modern and sophisticated. Thus, Bombay, being a port city, was also influenced by ocean liners and attracted by the luxury and grandeur of these liners. Buildings with nautical features began to be built, with C-liner features like porthole windows, ship deck style railings. So you find porthole windows in this building and other features that you find which were nautical features of Art Deco. Another very interesting thing that happened in India was Art Deco got transformed in decorative features to Indo-Deco, and this term was given to signify how Indian themes were used in the low relief sculptures that were being made on the walls. Not just the European themes but Indian themes, integrated themes of traditional Indian mythology into design. Indian farmers, Hindu gods and goddesses, figures from Indian mythology, they began to be reflected in the facade reliefs. Thus, with the Art Deco giving that initial fuel or push, and modernism came in, and gradually Art Deco was phased out. Modernism in architecture and arts is a broad umbrella movement that emerged in the late 19th, and I should rather say late 19th, that is somewhere around 1990s. There was an inkling of the rise of modernism. Initially with the works of Joseph Hoffmann and Otto Wagner, we could see some of the principles of modernism being reflected there, but it gradually picked up momentum post World War I with the works of Walter Gropius, Mies van der Rohe, Le Corbusier, and really picked tremendous momentum after Second World War. So early 20th century, late 19th century was the phase of its development and for its establishment as the most important revolution in architecture in the modern times, which brought about a radical shift in the way buildings are designed. In response, it was in response to the Industrial Revolution, rapid urbanization and new technologies. It was the movement that did not reject technology but embraced technology, radical departure from traditional styles, and defined and promoted by architects, theorists and movements across Europe and globally. The core ideas of modernism and who propounded them. First comes form follows function. Louis Sullivan said form ever follows function, 1896, which was later adopted by Bauhaus and Corbusier. The rejection of ornament, and it was written in the essay Ornament and Crime by Adolf Loos, 1908. Then it was rejected by Bauhaus, the D-style movement and the international style. The embrace of industrial materials by Corbusier, by Gropius and by Soviet constructivist architects. We will talk about that. Truth to materials, to be used the materials in a true form done by Mies van der Rohe and the Bauhaus school. Simplicity and clarity of form, we see that in the industrial style and the D-style movement. Universality of architecture in the Congress International, the architecture modern, all the architects that were involved in that, and architects like Walter Gropius. Integration of art and technology, again Bauhaus, D-style, constructivism, urban planning for a better society, definitely the contribution of Le Corbusier and Khayyam. The subset styles of modernism, there were several subset styles of modernism. Bauhaus with functionalism, D-style, constructivism, expressionism, the international style, organic modernism, rationalism and brutalism. We will look at all these subset movements of modernism one by one. So the fundamental principles embedded in modernism were true for all of them, but there were certain variations in between in between them, and I forgot, but we can also add to it, and we will be discussing it, is minimalism. Another movement which we will add to it and discuss about is called metabolism. It is, we can say that it is a subset but not a direct subset of modernism. It is definitely related, and then we will move on from there to the later developments leading on from modernism. These are some of the key manifestos that became important for modernism, written by Adolf Loos, Ornament and Climb, Le Corbusier towards a new architecture, Louis Sullivan, essay on the tall office building artistically considered, the Khayyam chapter, especially the Athens Charter, all became important for the rise of modernism. This is now talking about the international style, and even visually you will start understanding what this style is. Now already you know quite a bit, because over the past presentations I have been repeatedly discussing this style through the works of Gropius, Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe. And here in this picture you find 4 houses, all of them reflecting the white planar geometry, unornamented facades, ribbon windows or glass curtain wall idea in all 4 of them. Whether it is this house designed by Corbusier and his cousin Jean-Pierre Jeanneret in the Vision of Sidlung, or this house designed by Richard Dutra called the Lovell House, this house designed by Hans Scharoun, or Tugendhat House designed by Mies van der Rohe. It was first defined as the international style by Philip Russell Hitchcock and by Henry Russell Hitchcock and Philip Johnson in 1932 in an exhibition they held called Modern Architecture International Exhibition, which declared and labeled this style of early 20th century as the international style. So we can say that the beginning movement under modernism is the international style. It is a major architectural style that emerged in the 1920s, so the beginning years of modernism and the 1930s, and the formative decades of modern architecture, with the key principle form follows function. Why did it emerge? First was there was a increasing dissatisfaction with buildings having mixture of decorative features called eclecticism. I have talked about in great length when I discussed to you the buildings of the Industrial Revolution, like the St. Pancras station that you see here, that has got an eclectic combination of Gothic and Renaissance merged together in its form. Architects were greatly dissatisfied with this kind of buildings. The design had no relation to the building function. We look at the building, the Pancras station from inside, we find this tremendously industrial, engineered vault of glass and steel which runs over the tracks, and we do not find any coherence between this and what is on the outside, the building form. And this, there was no relation of this outward form to the building's actual function. It did not, by its own, it is not, doesn't look like a railway station until you name it one. Then was a need of buildings in large numbers which were commercial and civic to serve a rapidly industrializing society. I had told you this also when I was talking about the Industrial Revolution, that the architects of the time faced a huge predicament, and that was they had to design a large number of buildings because of Industrial Revolution. These buildings were required like railway stations, industrial buildings, exchange building, housing, etc. But they had no precedent. They didn't have any buildings like that had been made before. There never had been railway stations before them, or many other types of building. How to design them in the industrial period became a very big question for them, and they could not solve that problem. Here also the problem existed, that there was a requirement of a large number of buildings for a rapidly industrialized society, but they had the answer. The machine and the industry was the answer, that we integrate art with the machine and then we design the buildings of today. And thus the solution was the development of new construction techniques that involved the use of steel, glass and RCC, the desire to create a modern style of architecture for the modern man, emphasize the need for neutral functional style without any decorative features, and Romanesque, Gothic, Renaissance, all these architectural styles are old fashioned and obsolete. Thus, in the international style development, technology was a critical factor. There was now availability of cheap iron and steel, which together with the steel skeleton structure, brick and stone buildings became technically obsolete. Architects began using RCC for floors and secondary support and making exteriors of the buildings with glass. The result was functional and unornamented architecture. The principle of modern buildings is clear harmony between appearance, function and technology. There was a surge of growth in cities in the first half of the 20th century, particularly after the Second World War. International style was an easily achievable style. We find it, for example, as far away as in India in the WHO building by Habib Rahman, or in the Cathedral of Brasilia by Oscar Niemeyer in Brazil. International style became the dominant tendency in American architecture during the mid 20th century. From single family residential buildings to low rise buildings in Europe, it moved on to skyscrapers in America. From Europe in the 1920s to USA in the 1930s, the skyscraper technique was already there in the US. But because of this transfer of architects like Mies van der Rohe and Walter Gropius and Marcel Breuer etc. to America, this skyscraper got a sleek modern look, an absence of decoration and a use of steel and glass onwards from 1955 to 1970. We see that in the Seagram building, we see that in the UN headquarters by Oscar Niemeyer and other architects. So this came to be called as corporate modernism. If you compare how the change happened, let us take a Chicago school building, a tall building before the European architects landed in America, and this has lot of ornamentation, this has many breaks by these spandrels all over the building. But when you compare it to the sleek international style glass and steel building, this one in Toronto, and you are able to see how tremendous visual change came in the tall building. Thus corporate modernism, building symbolic of corporate identity, like this Dirksen Federal building by Mies van der Rohe in 1964. These are some examples of skyscrapers or tall buildings all over the world to show you the global impact of the international style on the design of the tall building. And the international style thus became the dominant style of the 20th century, not only for the tall corporate building, but also for residential, institutional, commercial buildings, for schools and post offices, for religious buildings, multi-purpose buildings. One style that was being used for all buildings, the international style. So Hitchcock and Johnson, because they coined the term international style, they then listed out three key design principles of the international style. Number one, architecture as volume and not mass. International style architecture as an open flowing space enclosed by thin non-load bearing planes. It is not a solid heavy mass. In historical architecture, like you see the Pantheon designed in Paris by Jacques-Germain Soufflot in 1790, the buildings are massive blocks, solid, made of stone and brick, with emphasis on weight and solidity and solid walls. In the international style, like the Villa Savoy by Le Corbusier, the buildings are as volumes, hollow spatial enclosures with walls and roofs are thin non-load bearing planes enclosing the space, and there is emphasis on transparency, on light and free flowing interiors. When you look at regularity in facade as opposed to building symmetry, the design is logical functional regularity rather than classical symmetry. Why? Because of industrial standardization and modular construction. So if you look at, say, the Bauhaus, you find that the facade may not have a classical symmetry, but there is a regularity from one panel to the other, and this is happening because these standard elements have been manufactured in the factory as modules, and then these modules have been brought on site and they have been put together, modular construction. And all these modules are standardized from right to left, top to bottom, all the units are identical. There is this regularity in the facade. So Bauhaus Dessau, form follows function but is visually harmonious. In Versailles, this is classical symmetry in the Palace of Versailles. It expresses power and order. But Bauhaus, with regularity based on function, is a central approach of the international style. Point number 3, no applied ornamentation. Ornament was not to be added to the structure. The form and materials are to speak for themselves. The form and materials are to provide the aesthetic of the building. The surfaces are clean, undecorated and honest in their expression. For example, the Barcelona pavilion that I have taught you, which was designed by Mies van der Rohe. Now, if you compare it to Opera Garnier, this building where there is a lot of applied ornament to impress and to narrate a story, it is heavily ornamented. Barcelona Pavilion is stripped of all ornamentation. The beauty comes through the form, the materials and the proportion with which they have been put together. In case of international style, what are the characteristics? That is typically rectilinear buildings with flat roofs, straight lines and right angles, light, tight, taut plane surfaces without ornamentation, free flowing interiors, a visual weightless quality that is achieved through, for example, the use of cantilever construction that we find in The Falling Water by Frank Lloyd Wright. International style characteristics also includes use of modern material like glass, steel and RCC, extensive use of glass especially in curtain walls, and the materials are celebrated through exposed structures. There is a truth and honesty in the use of materials, they are not covered. The architects, the first are the great masters. Directly Frank Lloyd Wright was not associated with the international style, but his shadow hovered over the international style because his contribution with regard to design of spaces or free flowing interior etc. was immense. And then we have Le Corbusier, Mies van der Rohe and Walter Gropius. Thus the international style grew out of a small group of brilliant and original architects in the 1920s who achieved great influence in architecture and they were followed by or nearly worked along with them and then went on further were J.G.P. Aud, Richard Meyer, Philip Johnson, Richard Neutra, Alvar Aalto, Hans Meyer. Adolf Meyer worked along with Walter Gropius. Eliel Saarinen worked at the time, followed by his son Eero Saarinen. Many Japanese architects, the number of architects and the range is huge. These are all international style architects who made a tremendous contribution to the start of modernism. We will conclude here and then we will carry on with the other styles and movements that were the subsets of modernism. Thank you.